and welcome to a new edition of True Audio Files. Today, as you could tell by the title, is going to be my sound quality shootout for Michael Jackson Off the Wall. Unless you've been living in a cave, you should probably know by now that Mofi just released the one-step version of Off the Wall. Here's my copy of it. I have number 1086 out of 6000, as you could see probably there, hopefully. And basically, I did a couple of things with this review. One that I don't usually do. The one that I always do is test it against another copy of the album. In this case, I have an early pressing of Off the Wall. It's not a first pressing. It's probably, if I had to venture a guess, it probably is a version that came out probably around the same time the Thriller did. But regardless, it's an early pressing. And the other thing that I've done is I was able to obtain a digital copy, I have to stress, of a remaster that was done by Tom Coyne, who, there is a remaster that he has done, I think a few years ago, in the 2000s or 2010s, if I'm not mistaken. But this is a version that was never released, which I believe is a little bit more dynamic, and it's a different mastering altogether. I don't remember the differences because I didn't. Admittedly, I didn't do the research to do a sound quality shootout between this unreleased remaster and the released version that he did. But by all accounts of the people that have heard this remaster that he did, it's considered by far the best digital version of the album. So I decided I wanted to listen to that and compare it also to the One Step and the original. And I'll get into a big reason why in a few minutes. But anyways, what I typically do, if for those of you who don't watch, and I'm going to add a little bit of nuance that I don't always add into here. But first thing I do is I will listen to the whole new release all the way through once to kind of listen to the different tracks to see which one I think is going to be the best one or two tracks to listen to compare all the different nuances of the album in one or two tracks, so I can do the A/B comparison. It's a lot easier to do one track than several tracks at once. So I do that, and then the next step in my process that I also do is I have a sound meter, and I make sure that all versions of the album that I'm going to listen to are level matched to where when I do the comparisons, I make sure that the volume level is within probably it's within less than half a dB, but it's usually within like a 2 to 0.2 to 0.3 dB difference, which means all of them are going to sound virtually identical volume wise. So that's the next step in my process, because human perception is if something is louder, it's going to sound better. And that's part of the reason for for those of you who kind of know about the loudness wars, that's kind of the whole philosophy behind that and why that's done. But regardless, that's what I do for these shootouts. So what I did is, like I said, I listened to the One Step. I thought it sounded really good. I really loved the bass. It was definitely, I feel, an appropriate amount of bass. It was tight, it was accurate, it just kind of kicked you in the chest and lower. I think that it sounds very good. I think also, though, that if people are not bass freaks or big fans of bass, maybe they may not like that as much. But overall, I thought it sounded really good. I thought the overall sound of the album was warm sounding. It definitely had a very, very wide sound stage. As a matter of fact, some of the stuff even sounded like it went beyond the speakers, like in front of the speakers. And like especially the reverb and actually a cowbell and Don't Stop Till You Get Enough on the right side was pretty impressive with that. And it was a pretty deep sound stage as well. If I had to nitpick a little bit, I think that there was a smidge of sibilance on this, and this very well could just be my system's starting to get a little out of whack, maybe needs to be fine-tuned a little bit, but I've been finding that's the case with most of my, or not most of my, but most of the mobile fidelities that have come out over the past year or so. There've been some exceptions, but that's been my experience with most of them, and most of my other albums that I listen to don't have sibilants, so hard to say if it's just my system or it's just a change that MoFi has done that has created that for my system and others, because I have heard other people have these issues with sibilants for the MoFis as well. But in this particular case, it's very, very minimal, very minimal. So I'm not going to sit here and say that it's something that was a distraction in any way. So unfortunately, with my system, the way I've got it set up, and how good I feel my preamp is, my phono preamp, it really kind of separates the sibilants from the other stuff, so it becomes a little bit more evident that it's sibilants. So, anyways, that would be the minor quibble that I have with the Mofi One Step version. So very minor sibilants. So I then put on the early pressing, and I thought, it definitely sounded good, but as is the case with most late 70s, maybe very early 80s, maybe even just 80s in general, the bass was definitely not anywhere near as strong as it was on the MoFi, and the high end was definitely up there, but and I'm sorry, I would say, like the mid range was pretty decent though. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad either. It definitely had a very thin sound to it. It definitely lacked that warmth that the Mobile Fidelity one did. And the bigger thing that was much more noticeable is the soundstage was definitely not as wide, and it wasn't definitely as deep either. It definitely sounded a little bit flattened out. That's probably because there was more compression on this mastering than there was on the Mobile Fidelity one. As a rule, my understanding is Mobile Fidelity uses zero compression when they do these cuts. Basically, the only differences they tend to do at the time of cutting is kind of just make sure the EQ is in place, and when they do these and they get it to their liking. So, anyways, I would say that it's definitely, the sound is definitely indicative of what you would hear from like 1979 when this album first came out. It's still a great sound quality and great sound, but definitely lacks the oomph and the warmth and the sound stage that the MoFi does, in my opinion. I mean, objectively speaking, it's definitely got the wider sound stage. That's pretty hard to dispute. It's definitely got a deeper sound stage that I could perceive anyways. So, and it definitely had more bass. So, that's that. Then I decided to put on the digital version that I have. And by the way, it's a 2496 resolution, so it's a high resolution mastering of Off the Wall. And I found that it actually kind of fell somewhere in between the early pressing and the Mobile Fidelity. It sounded really, really good. It had more bass than the early pressing, but not quite as much bass as the MoFi, and it definitely had the same wide sound stage that the Mobile Fidelity had, but it definitely lacked the depth that the One Step had. And one of the things that was noticeable when you have that is the lack of, for lack of a better word, space between all the different instruments. So, but I'll have to say, if you're, this is an opinion, but I feel that probably the Tom Coyne is probably the most even and most neutral sounding of all of them. So, if you're more into the neutral sound of things, I would say that the Tom Coyne, if you could find a copy of it somewhere, it's gonna probably be the most neutral sounding of the three. However, I think, and actually, Mike from In the Groove kind of pointed this out. I watched his video on this, and I agree with him on this. Is that I think an album like this, given it's a dance album, most of the songs are dance tracks. The extra bass is actually warranted, and I don't know, in my opinion anyway, needed and really helps with the tracks. So I think it's a needed addition to this album. So, if you're talking about from a record standpoint, the One Step is definitely better than the early pressing, and it's sounds to me like, from all the reviews that I've listened to and read and things on that nature, it sounds like most people are on the same page with that. I will say, though, that if you can get your hands on that unreleased Tom Coyne remastering, that's digital, I know, but the One Step is digital technically as well. Uh, I would say that you'd be pretty happy with that, because there's not a ton of difference on that version versus the One Step, but to me there is a pretty sizable difference in sound to versus the early pressing. So to kind of summarize here, the I would say the mobile fidelity is going to be the best when it comes to the depth of Soundstage, and it's going to give you more bass, and I think the much needed more bass, but definitely more bass, and much more bass than the early pressing. And I would say one thing I didn't actually mention before is the Tom Coyne remaster probably had the best mid range of all of them. So treble, they were all pretty similar. You know, I can't really recall noticing a huge difference in the treble. I'm sure if I did some sort of measuring, I might find differences, but audibly to me, when I went back and forth between all of them, it wasn't a noticeable difference. So, but I think the Mofi out of all of them had the most warmth, definitely had the deepest sound stage. So I think from an EQ standpoint, dynamic range standpoint, things on that nature, I would say it definitely had the edge for my personal preferences. So now, is it worth $125? I guess it all depends on how important this album is to you. I think it's very good. I think if it's a great album to you and it's one of your favorites, I think it's kind of a no-brainer. Yes, they have an SACD version, so maybe you get that instead. I have not heard that version, to be perfectly honest with you, to know if it's going to have a similar sound characteristic to the One Step, because oftentimes the Super Audio CD that they make is going to have a different mastering than their records that they release. So, because different people master those. But kind of my take. The One Step is definitely great, you know, and maybe the SACD might be the best commercially available version on digital, if you will, if you're getting a CD or Super Audio CD. So those would be my go-tos here for you if you can afford either one. The Super Audio CD is not crazy expensive. I think it retails for like 35. So anyway, that's kind of my take. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you have a version that is better than any of the early pressings of Off the Wall besides a One Step? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. I know I've heard some of the most recent remasters, and they just definitely don't hold up against these the early pressing. And so this One Step's a nice refresh. But anyway, love to hear your thoughts. I want to thank you for watching. I'd like to thank you for subscribing if you subscribe. If you don't, please do so. I'd love to see some more subscribers. And please make your comments below. So that's everything I've got. So I want you to have yourself a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week. And I also likely will be doing a review on the new Green Day One Step, the Dookie One Step, because I'm supposed to be getting that within a couple of days. And hopefully we'll be able to review that next week. So thanks a lot, everybody.